everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share with you how to make these floating frame cars. If you haven't seen the floating frames around on Pinterest or Amazon, I'll leave some links down below. They're really gorgeous, but I wanted to try and recreate that look in my cards. So I'm grabbing some of my dried florals and leaves. Any dried flower or leaf is going to work for this. If you missed the video on the 2 ways that I like to press and dry my florals and leaves, I'll leave that linked in the top right hand corner. I do it myself at home. There are a few around on Amazon that you can just purchase. I'll leave those linked over on my Amazon storefront as well. But I pulled some of those. Then you're also going to need a card base of any size. You just want it large enough to fit your floral or leaf. And then you need a panel of the same size as the card front. Here's where you can have some fun. You can play around with different sizes. This type of card will work with any size of card base and panel you want to make. You just want to make sure that it's large enough to fit the flower or leaf that you are using, with a little bit of room on each side for that true floating effect. So I just chose some flowers that would fit into A2 size cards. That's my favorite to make. With enough space around them for that frame where they're not touching the frame. Because once it starts touching that frame, you lose the floating effect. Now, to make the opening, you've got a couple of options. You can use a die cutting machine. You can use electronic cutting machine. You can use just a craft knife and a ruler. And you can play around with the shape. I'm using a regular rectangle here, but play around, have some fun. You can do octagons, you can do squares, circles, you name it, you can do it. You're also going to need 2 pieces of acetate that are the same size, slightly smaller actually, than your panel and card base. So I like the Duralar film. I will leave it linked over on my Amazon storefront, but you can use any type of acetate. You just want a really nice, clear, thinner plastic to sandwich your floral in between. And I prefer that Duralar film. So the first thing you want to do is make your opening in the panel and the front of the card base. Not fully through the card base, but just the front panel. Now you can do that a number of ways. Like I said, I'm using my dies here. However, you can just use a craft knife and a ruler. You can use an electronic cutting machine. That really is up to you how you get that opening in there. But like I said, I'm using my die cutting machine. Now, in order to get this in the same exact place, I like to first align that die on my panel, tape it down with a little bit of painter's tape on the inside because I won't be using that piece, and then run that through my die cut machine along with the card base at the same time. Line them both up. This is going to give me alignment when I go to put these together. I'm not going to have to worry about, oh my gosh, is it going to fit? Is it going to line up? Will I have a little bit of overhang? Doing it this way puts them in the exact same position. One thing to note about the opening size, you do want to make sure that it is slightly larger, or you can go even quite larger than your floral or the dried pressed leaf that you're using. You don't want that frame to touch any of it. You want a nice space around it so it truly looks like it's floating there. And in reality, it will be floating there. There's nothing going to be holding it down. So I run that through, and then if you do it this way, you're probably not going to get a through cut on your back panel. It's just going to create kind of a nice guide for you to then run a craft knife along. That's how I do it anyway. If you've got a little bit more pressure, or you can get more in your cutting machine, you might get a nice cut. I didn't, so I just come in with a craft knife. But this is a nice way to look at how easy it would be to do this by hand. You don't need a die cutting machine. You can very easily just use a ruler and craft knife. I've done it many, many times myself. As I'm going around and cutting this out, let's talk a few of the ways that you can make this your own at this step in the process. So I'm using white cardstock. You can absolutely use different kinds of cardstock for your frames. I like to use a white card base always, but for that top panel, it's going to be the one that shows on the outside. You can use gold foil paper, silver foil paper. You can use a patterned cardstock. You can add texture with an embossing folder. A wood grain would be really beautiful. Anything that you want to do to that top panel, you can, and that will kind of make it your own. Another way to make this your own at this point is all of those different dried flowers and pressed flowers and leaves that you have. This is where you can really think about what this card is going to be for. So if it's for a birthday or a spring card, an Easter card, think about the type of leaf or flower you're using. So bright, fun, but as for a sympathy card, you might want something a bit more muted. So those are some different ways that you can kind of put your own twist on this project. Once those openings are made, I just like to check to make sure that they're large enough. So for this card, this is about as large as I could go in order to get some adhesive on those pieces. So keep that in mind as you're creating these and you pick out your florals and your leaves. Just make sure that your card base is large enough. If you need to go up to a 5x7, you can absolutely do that. If you have questions about making your own card bases, I will leave a link in the top right hand corner to a video that I have on that. It explains all the different sizes of cards you can make, how to do that, and then over on my blog there's a free printable that's kind of like a cheat sheet. So now I'm starting to put the card base together. I'm keeping mine very simple here just to keep it basic, but remember you can make this your own a number of ways. For the card base, on the front of the card base, the panel, I am putting down just some straight tape adhesive. You can use a liquid adhesive as well. I like to use a tape adhesive here because on top of this, once I get the backing paper off, I will be putting down acetate. You need that acetate to hold the pressed leaf or flower in place. So just make sure that your acetate is wide enough and long enough to cover that opening fully. You don't want any gaps in there. I like to make mine about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the opening. So I've got a little bit of wiggle room. I don't have to be so careful in lining it up. So I put that tape down, take the backing paper off, and then go ahead and press that acetate right on top. Now on the front panel, so you've got your card base and you've got your panel that's going to overlay on top. The card base, you put the adhesive on the front and the acetate on the front. On the panel itself, you want to work on the back. So you're going to put adhesive on the back, just like you did before, all 4 sides, lining them up so you don't have any gaps. And then you're going to lay that adhesive over the back. Essentially what you're doing is creating a little bit of a sandwich. If you think about it that way, it might be a little easier to orientate in your mind. And as you're making this sandwich, you don't want any of that adhesive showing. So think about it that way as you're putting this together and you're getting confused on which side to put the adhesive on, which side to put the acetate on. Just know, whenever you're putting it together, put it like a sandwich with the cardstock on both sides, then adhesive, then acetate. It's really that simple. It doesn't matter so much on the front panel. You can just kind of flip it if you screw it up. But on that card base, always put it on the front so you don't see it when you open it up on the inside. So I went ahead and adhered that paper tape adhesive to the back of the front panel. I'm taking off that backing paper and just overlaying a piece of acetate right on top of that adhesive. Now a thing about acetate, it can get a little bit clingy or staticky, especially during the wintertime when it's dry. If you need to, just rub it over with a little bit of a dryer sheet and that should take that static away, no big deal. Also, you can wipe it down with a lint-free cloth like I'm doing here. This creates and collects dust like nobody's business. And once it's trapped in there, it's trapped in there. So just wipe it down with a lint-free cloth to make sure you get all of those little dust or paper balls or whatever you have floating around your craft room out. Once it's nice and clean, we're going ahead and adding one more layer of adhesive to the back of that front panel. You don't need it on both sides this time because you're going to be putting them together now. You're going to adhere that front panel to the card base at this point. So you only need it on one side. A little note, that I didn't mention, while you're rubbing down that acetate, be sure to use a soft lint-free cloth like you would for glasses or a TV screen, because that acetate will scratch relatively easy. And once it's scratched, there's no going back. So just use a nice lint-free cloth for that wipe down process. All right, so I put that adhesive on there. I am removing that adhesive backing paper. And now comes the part of sandwiching. So you want to make sure you have your floral picked out. You need to make sure that you have a nice strong adhesive on there. Go ahead and place that dried leaf or flower, whatever you are using down. Make sure you have it placed right where you want it. And then we're just going to sandwich it between the two pieces of cardstock. You do not need any adhesive. You do not want any adhesive on that dried leaf or flower, because you can see it from both sides. You don't want anything overshadowing it. You don't want anything kind of taking away from that effect. So just place it in there. Make sure you don't use dimensional adhesive, because then you're going to get that wiggle room around like you would with a shaker card. Keep it nice and flat, keep it nice and tight, and everything will stay in place. But when you open that, you can see the leaf from both the front and the back. It truly is gorgeous and looks like it's just floating there. I love the look of these cards. It's so neat. So there you have a look at that. You can see straight through it. You can give it a nice wipe down. Now to finish this off, I just add a nice little sentiment strip. I layered up a little bit of old book page, cardstock, and a sentiment on the front. I went from edge to edge. That way I could use those edges to hold the adhesive down. And then if you need to, you can put a little bit right where that leaf is, so then you don't see it on the back side. Just be mindful that you're seeing from both sides when you place your adhesive down. All right, so I'm going to do this process one more time and walk you through it one more time, this time with a flower and a little bit smaller opening. Like I said, this is kind of the most important step, is sizing everything out. You want to make sure that your opening is large enough to where you have space around all sides. You can make it even bigger if you want. I just like it to kind of fit with about 1/4 of an inch on each side. But by all means, do it larger if you want. I mean, that would be really cool. Again, I am using an A2 card base. This time I'm doing top folding. So I did, or no, excuse me, side folding. I did top folding earlier. This one is side folding, but same process. So you can orientate these cards different ways if you need to. So if you have a really long fern frond that you want to put in there, think about maybe making a longer card, like those new slimline card bases that are so popular. But again, we're doing the same process no matter what size card we use. We're starting off with a panel and a card base of the same size. We're making an opening that is slightly larger than our pressed, dried floral or leaf. Now again, do that any number of ways. You can do it by hand, you can do it with the die cut machine, you can do it with the electronic cutting machine. Just make an opening. That opening can be any shape you want. Then you want to make sure that as you're making that opening, you make it in the same spot on both the front panel and the card base, so that it lines up whenever you go to make your frame. Make your frame, your front panel, however you want. Use any kind of cardstock you want. Then you need 2 pieces of acetate that are larger than those openings, just so you can adhere them down and you don't have any trouble with it, and you don't have any wiggle room for any little stray leaf or something that breaks off to sneak out of the card. You want everything contained. I like to use the Duralar film. You can use old packaging. You could use vellum. Just know it's not going to be clear. It's going to give you that foggy look, and I think that takes away from it. So while you could use it, I don't think I necessarily would, but you could. And then once you have all your pieces, you're going to make your card sandwich. You're going to take your card base, put adhesive around that opening on the front, and overlay your acetate on top of that opening. Then on your card panel, your front panel, you're going to put adhesive around the opening on the back. Then you're going to overlay your acetate to make that sandwich. Then you want to add more adhesive to the back of that front panel. Now this one I have a little bit more room. You want to make sure that you go right up to those edges. You don't want anything slipping out. You want a tight grip, because again, this frame and that pressure is the only thing that is holding those pressed florals and leaves in place. You're not adding any adhesive to them. And you want to make sure you have a nice tight grip. Then go ahead and place your dried floral down. In this case, I am using some dried hydrangea. Center it in there how you want it. It doesn't have to be centered, just place it in there how you want it. And then overlay that top panel right on top of the card base, being mindful to keep everything nice and aligned. Then go ahead and give that a good press down, because again, that pressure is the only thing holding it in place. Give it a good wipe down and you're good to go. There you can see you've got that floral. You can see from both sides. No adhesive to kind of blur the view, and then finish off your card however you want to, being mindful where you put adhesive on that finished card. I like to put it on the edges, so I like to do a nice long sentiment strip. That way I can use the edges to hold that in place. For this one, again, use the same concept. Old book page that I tore along the back, a piece of cardstock, and then another piece of white cardstock with the sentiment on top for a little bit of layering, a little bit more interest on this very simple card. But there you have it. These are how I make those floating frame cards that were so popular on Pinterest and Amazon. I was glad I was able to integrate it into my card making, and I got to share it with you all. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below. The supply list is over on my Amazon storefront page. Thanks for watching and happy crafting.